Most people think wisdom is about being smart, about reading more books, gaining more knowledge, making better decisions. And if you just keep learning and growing, eventually you will figure life out. But Proverbs 1 opens with a statement that completely destroys that idea in one sentence. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, not the middle, not a helpful addition, the beginning. Which means everything you think you know, every decision you have ever made, every plan you have carefully put together, if it was not built on this one foundation, it was built on sand. Today we are going to break down what Proverbs 1 is actually saying and why understanding it might be the most important thing you do this year. Before we get into the text, let us understand what kind of book Proverbs actually is. Most people read it like a collection of helpful tips, a verse here, a verse there, something encouraging to put on a coffee mug. But the opening of Proverbs is what scholars call a programmatic prologue. That is a fancy way of saying this is not just an introduction, it is a declaration that redefines everything that comes after it. The Hebrew word for Proverbs is mishle, which comes from the root mashal, meaning to compare, to place alongside. A proverb is not a command handed down from a king. It is a mirror that lets you see yourself clearly, and that changes everything about how you read what comes next. Verses 2 through 6 tell us exactly who this book is for. It is for the simple and inexperienced who need help seeing the traps of life before they fall into them. It is for the young who need knowledge and discretion. But then verse 5 says something surprising. Even the wise should listen and add to their learning. This book has no expiration date. It works for everyone at every stage of life. Whether you are just starting out or you have been walking with God for decades, there is something here that will make you wiser. Then comes verse 7 and everything changes. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. This single verse is the hinge on which the entire book turns. So what does the fear of the Lord actually mean? Because most people hear the word fear and immediately think about being terrified of God, like he is waiting to punish you the moment you step out of line. But the Hebrew word used here is yirah, and it means something much deeper than fright. Yirah is reverence, awe, and a posture of the soul before something infinitely greater than yourself. It is what you feel when you stand at the edge of the ocean at night and realize how small you are. It is the recognition that there is something bigger, wiser, and more powerful than you, and your response to that recognition is not panic, but humility. Here is where it gets really important. The text says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The Hebrew word for knowledge here is dat, which means raw perception, the ability to see reality as it actually is. And what Proverbs is saying is this: without reverence for God, your perception of reality is distorted. You cannot see clearly. You think you are making wise decisions, but you are actually operating on a foundation that cannot hold the weight of real life. Yirah is not just the first step toward wisdom. It is the ground on which wisdom stands. Think of it like a building. Wisdom is the whole structure, the walls, the rooms, the roof. But the fear of God is not just the first brick. It is the foundation itself. Without it, everything eventually collapses, no matter how impressive it looks from the outside. Now look at the contrast in verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The Hebrew word for fool here is evil, and it does not mean someone who is unintelligent. It means someone who is morally stubborn, someone who refuses correction. The fool in Proverbs is not someone who lacks access to wisdom. The fool is someone who has access and chooses to reject it. That is the most uncomfortable truth in this entire chapter. The distinction is not between smart and dumb. It is between open and closed, between the person who says, "Teach me," and the person who says, "I already know." And that rejection shows up in completely predictable ways throughout the rest of Proverbs. The fool speaks without thinking and causes conflict. The fool rejects wise counsel and suffers the consequences. The fool trusts their own understanding and ends up in ruin. But Proverbs presents these not merely as punishments from God, but as consequences woven into the very structure of reality. And this is how the world works. If you build your life without the fear of God, this is what follows, because that is how reality is built. So here is what Proverbs 1 is really giving you, not a list of good advice. An operating system, a foundation. It is saying, before you read any of the practical wisdom that follows in this book, you need to understand one thing. None of it works without this foundation. The fear of God is not a religious add-on to an otherwise practical book. It is the thing that makes the practical wisdom actually work in real life. You can read every self-help book ever written, attend every seminar, follow every productivity system, and still build a life that collapses, because knowledge without the fear of God is just information. But when you submit your intelligence, your plans, and your understanding to God, something shifts. You start to see reality more clearly. You start to make decisions that actually hold up under pressure. You start to live with a wisdom that goes beyond what you can think your way into. This week, read Proverbs 1 slowly and ask yourself one honest question. Where am I trusting my own understanding instead of submitting to God's wisdom? Not where am I uninformed, where am I choosing not to know? Because that is the question Proverbs 1 is really asking.